Good afternoon, good morning, wherever you are, and welcome to Dishing on Presentations. It's a great conversation with 4 leaders in their fields, and we're very excited to have them here today, as well as Dave Zielinski and myself. So let me tell you a little bit about how you can stay connected with us. So you to submit your question, use the question tab on the dashboard. We'll be glad to share the comments and the questions. Want to thank everybody for also telling us a little bit about why you're here. We'll include some of that later. Next is let's talk about how we build a community. We're on lots of social media. We have a website that's full of resources. We've got our blog now on Tumblr. We're everywhere. And the whole idea is that this is really for you, specifically for you to follow us and remember that we're a real source of information for what you need. It gives me great pleasure to introduce my co-presenter or co-host here. So Dave Zielinski, who is the editor of Presentation Expert, and we're really excited to have this amazing panel of people so we can talk about a lot of stuff. So at this point, Dave, let me turn it over to you, and you can introduce our speakers.
Thank you, Sharyn, and welcome everyone to today's webinar, which has a little different format than you're used to, but I think you'll enjoy the give and take and the unplugged nature of the session. To begin, I'd like to introduce our esteemed panel of presentation experts and also thank them for participating today. To start, we have Rick Altman of Better Presenting and the longtime host of the Presentation Summit set for next month in New Orleans. We have Nolan Haims of Nolan Haims Creative, Dr. Carmen Simon of Rexy Media, and last but not least, Michael Parkinson of Billion Dollar Graphics. So that is our team.
Let's get the conversation started. Rick, tell us about the summit and what are the exciting themes that our subscribers are going to hear about?
Well, I suppose the best advertisement for the summit will be this next hour. Carmen, Mike, and Nolan are 3 of our most popular presenters, and we're going to get to hear them dish about all sorts of things. I guess this hour is sort of a microcosm because at the conference, we hope that we will make your heads explode with all sorts of incredible knowledge, but really a lot of the magic is the interplay between the people and your peers and getting to network with people and meet your colleagues. You know, there really isn't any other way that I'm aware of where so many presentation professionals all congregate at one time. And boy, have we picked a good place to congregate. We are in the French Quarter of New Orleans at the foot of Bourbon Street, literally. And the late September should be a wonderful time there. And we will almost certainly sell out. In fact, we will probably do so before Labor Day. So presentationsummit.com is the place to go if you want to join us. We'd love to have you.
Great. Dave, I know you had a question for Carmen. Why don't we start with that question?
Yeah, Carmen, I know you've done a lot of work around brain science and how to improve what people remember or take away from presentations. Can you give us some sense of, or just a few tips for the audience on how to remember the right things from their PowerPoint presentations, not just some things you can do just to enhance memory?
Carmen, you have muted yourself.
That's Carmen at her best, ladies and gentlemen.
Sometimes silence is the best way to get other people to remember. I like what you said about getting an audience to remember some things versus remembering the right things. Anyone in your audience, whether you're delivering face-to-face or virtual presentations, very much like we're doing today, is going to walk away with a percentage of knowledge remembered or a feeling that is remembered as a result of that section. We're looking at science and realizing that there's a forgetting curve that the brain goes through. And that forgetting curve is exponential. We forget very fast at first and much slower afterwards. So it's very likely that after 2 days or so, people will remember about 10%. We'll use that as a metaphorical number. It's literally impossible to place a fixed number on how much people remember after your session. However, there is something that you can do in terms of impacting that metaphorical 10% because what we realize that it's not such a big problem that people take away very little. What the big problem is that people take away random things. So control your 10%. I have discovered that there are about 15 variables that can help us impact memory. Some are more intuitive than others. For instance, repetition, as you all know, is the mother of memory, so that is an obvious one. So is emotion. We don't have to spend much time on those. But if we were to look at some things that are a little bit less intuitive, I like trade-offs, and I like proportions between variables. So imagine this. Here's one that you will enjoy. A good trade-off between something that is familiar and something that is unpredictable. Because if you look at your audiences and you say, I want to witness something that is familiar. Actually, I have a question for all of you. What would you prefer in a presentation? Something that seems familiar to you or something that is surprising?
I like to be surprised because then I feel I'm engaged with the information.
Yeah, and I'm not surprised by that answer because anytime I ask that question, people immediately say, of course we love surprises. We like to be engaged and we like the novelty of it all and it just feels oh so great. But if we were to put your brains in an MRI machine and flash in front of your brain some pictures so fast that your conscious brain cannot process it, so there'd be anything under 200 milliseconds or so, and then after you leave the MRI session and people show you the picture that you have somewhat seen in the MRI versus a new picture, you prefer the one that you have seen. So subconsciously we prefer familiarity because we know that if we can master our surroundings, we increase our biological fitness, but consciously we say we love surprises. So as you ponder your own content right now for your next audiences, ask this question. What can I have as a trade-off between familiarity and surprise, and what ratio am I comfortable with? Because, for instance, for a seminar like today, this webinar, we can push the ratio towards the surprises a little bit more and towards the unpredictable. Whereas in an executive presentation, for instance, that ratio would not be in those proportions. You would probably want to give something that feels a little bit more familiar and not so much taxing the surprise. Tell me some of your reactions as you're hearing this.
I would say that I definitely see a need for both. I mean, I know there's sometimes you want specific information because the subject or the content is, you know, animation or making a memorable presentation. So you have an expectation as to what you get, but you also have the same expectation that you want to learn something new, and that's why you attend.
Yes, yes. Give them something that they expect and something they didn't expect.
So Carmen, let me ask you, between familiar and memorable, I wonder how each of them rates on the emotive scale, because I wonder if that isn't the most important component of all, is how evocative it is and to what degree it stirs the emotions of your audience.
Yes, so I'll give you some concepts, because in order for us to say to our audience today, look, this is what you have to do, we have to define concepts really well. And here is a platform that I'd like to propose. Your audience's brains come to your sessions, whether it's a blog or a presentation. We use that word session or presentation loosely. So they come to your communication with only one goal in mind, which is to seek rewards of sorts. The brain is constantly looking for rewards. And there are three elements that plug into that. There is the memory, because we know what's rewarding because we have been experiencing in the past. So the past feeds our future. There's the emotion and there is the motivation. So look at emotions as the state that you're in when you're receiving rewards or you're moving away from rewards. And look at motivation as the amount of work that you're willing to do in order to get those rewards. And now that you have those three terms in mind, memory, motivation, and emotion, it's a lot easier to process any of these variables that I'm offering, such as something that feels familiar versus something that feels surprising, something that feels new versus something that feels old.
I've got an email into him to
I love it.
So what is that? Because if you're talking about unpredictable, we just witnessed it right now.
That's right. Yes, we did. Absolutely.
And I like this because I guarantee that if we were to poll our audience members 2 days from now and say, hey, we are a few minutes into the segment, what do you remember? I guarantee that segment will stand out just because it was so unpredictable.
Some rogue guy talking about his emails.
That is funny. How is that possible?
All right, Dave, where are we going next?
Well,
Dave, Dave, do you mind if I just jump? I'd love to ask Carmen and everybody. Do you recommend a speaker engineering what they want to be memorable? For example, one thing I tell people sort of as a straight up, truth is that people will remember almost nothing. So if they can take away one thing, what would you want it to be? So what are your thoughts about really engineering that for your audience as opposed to letting them choose what they're going to take away?
I have a very strong opinion about that, but I want to let everybody else contribute, and I can bring it to closure when you're ready.
Yeah,
Okay.
in all of my sessions that I teach everywhere around the world, I always say, know what you want to say before you say it. Know what you want to cause. There's a gentleman by the name of Andy Bounds. He's an amazing, amazing presenter from the UK, and he said, what do we want after? He calls it the afters. What do we want to have happen after the presentation is over with? What do we want to cause? And so kind of reverse engineering it. What do we want to have afterwards? What steps do we need to take to have that occur? And all of this starts to play together, the emotion, the memory, etc. So know what you want to say based on know what you want to cause. So what would you say in order to get people to do what you'd like them to do? Figuring that out is a challenge, and then of course then we need to figure out how to say it in a way that's very memorable. Hopefully that was a little bit helpful.
Yeah, no, that is an outstanding point, because memory is only used in function in service of something. It's useless for us to just simply remember. If we just sit here and reminisce about all sorts of things, it will be, oh, maybe a short-lived good feeling emotion, but that's about it. Memory is there to serve us to get to the next step. So you're absolutely right. Usually on any kind of surveys that if you ever have the ability to do after any of your sessions, you put in these two questions, you'll be very well served. And those two questions are, what do I want people to remember, and what will they do about it? If you have the answers to those two questions, you will stay in business. When we don't have the answers to those two questions, it's a lot harder.
I love how cerebral Mike was with that response. I think I'm not sure it's possible to be as diametrically opposite, but I am, because I go about it from a completely different point of view. I really don't think about any of that. I know when I've engaged audience members. I know when they are really with me, present in the present moment, and that's good enough for me. I know that if I have them in the moment, they're going to remember the things I want them to remember. I don't actually process this cognitively anymore beyond that.
I'm going to be Rick's shrink for just a bit, and I'll look at
the occupational hazards of that are very high, Carmen.
I'll look at Rick as the exception. And you have an exceptional then talent to be intuitive about your environment. Many of us do not have those qualities that you do, so we have to think our way through it and measure a little bit more. People like you are very lucky because they don't have to then spend that extra cognitive power to come up with these strategies. But there are some people who will be in front of others and they will not know what works and what doesn't unless there is some prescriptive piece around it. They don't have that kind of intuition that you do, and then what happens? Then what happens is we leave memory to chance, and if you leave memory to chance, like Mike is saying, we leave cause to chance.
That was a very nice way for Carmen just to say that I'm lazy.
Okay, guys, well, I'm going to turn the conversation over to resources. Favorite resources. I'm going to pose this to Nolan and then to the group at large. Nolan, I know you like to share some of your favorite resources during your presentation summit sessions. Anything that you've used of late that you can pass on to our audience? Anything you would put in the category of a go-to resource that you can speak about, and then I'll turn it over to the group at large.
You know, I use a variety of resources. I use you know, a lot of professional stock sites, and I just use the word professional. You know, just because it tends to cost a little bit of money, it doesn't have to be. My favorite one is Shutterstock.com. I'm a visual thinker, so in any presentation I'm doing, I'm going to be using a lot of imagery, a lot of iconography. I'm finding that I'm using that in probably about 90% of my presentations, and I'm seeing it used elsewhere. We're all seeing it. We're seeing it in apps, on websites. So You can get iconography a lot of places out there. There are websites, IconCB, the Noun Project. I would really encourage people. There are a lot of resources out there, but I would really encourage people. And when people say, "Well, I don't have a budget. I can't buy stock photography, or I can't, buy icons to use. So I have to go out and steal it from Google or use clip art or something hopelessly dated." I just ask people to really just take a step back, and can you really not afford a couple of dollars here or there? Can you really not? Some of these icons you can buy for free, or buy for $1, or some are even free. And using a professional image, using a professional icon, it doesn't have to cost a fortune, and it takes your presentation to a new level. It prevents it from looking PowerPointy. So I always tell people, I just take a look again, ask your boss. I think you might be able to carve out $100 a month for some imagery, or $10 for some icons. And it's hard for me to actually keep up on sort of all the resources because they're changing constantly. Every day there's a new stock site out there. So, Google the stuff, find what works. The one good thing, if anybody's on PowerPoint 2013, Office 2013, and the to come 2016, on the PC side, I should say, not the Mac side, but on the PC side, Microsoft has actually gotten rid of their whole clip art thing, and they now give you a direct window, basically, to Creative Commons imagery on Bing. So you can actually insert, I forget exactly what it's called, but I think it's called Insert from Web or Web Search, and it will actually search Creative Commons imagery for you. And Creative Commons is great. It's a little tricky. I'm not a lawyer, but I'll just give that caveat. It's a little tricky, but basically Creative Commons is free imagery. And there's a lot of that I shouldn't have used that sentence, but it can be used without cost. And there's a lot of great stuff out there. So I'll end it with saying look to Creative Commons imagery.
Great. Thanks a lot. Anybody else like to chime in on that? Mike or Rick, in terms of free resources or favorite resources?
Well, I want to know where Carmen gets her photos, because nobody gets more engaging photos than she does.
Well, like Nolan, we definitely believed in paid things, and for more modern and more recent ones that I have noticed, there is a site that I'm enjoying. It's called Death to the Stock Photo, and it's a very inexpensive monthly subscription, and you get photos that have a more genuine approach to life and imagery in general. And when all else fails, I definitely recommend capturing your own. We are now these days surrounded by so many devices that we can capture photos with, and high resolution as such. All that is required is that you use your eyes well. When we go through life way too fast, we fail to notice, and it's a shame because there are so many moments out there waiting for you to capture them, and that comes with an immediate level of authenticity, something that is very difficult to replicate with the stock photography. You'll definitely need a big team of graphic artists to rescue stock photos.
I'd love to jump on something you said, which is about using your own imagery. There's something that I want to make a plea for in the universe right now, which is try to get away from the use of metaphoric imagery. And I'm going to give you the great example here, because I think Carmen would agree it's not memorable in the way you want it to be. So let's say you want to talk about your really powerful, strong sales team. You might be tempted to go to a website, buy a photo of, a relay, an Olympic relay team, or some sort of sports, or people, doing trust falls, things like that. And it's a great imagery. It's beautifully shot. But compare that to using an actual photo that you took of your actual sales team that has been hitting it out of the park. That actual literal photo is going to be far more effective and far more memorable because it is what you're talking about.
Nolan, do you mean to say that the photo of the man crossing the finish line wearing a business suit holding a briefcase is not a good idea?
Absolutely. I always say, it's fine if you want to use a photo of a guy hanging off a cliff, mountain climbing, if your business is mountain climbing. But if it's selling widgets, there's a disconnect there. So try to get literal imagery whenever you can. And I think it's easier than people think it is. So anyway, that's my plea. Please, literal imagery, not metaphoric.
I'm going to be the first to sign that plea, and I promise to gather at least 1,000 signatures, if not more. I have some explanations as to why that tendency happens. Why is it that people go to stock photo, iStock Photo, or Dreamstime, whatever it is that you're using, Shutterstock, and download those? And the idea is this, and I wonder what you think. We tend to use metaphors for very simple concepts. In other words, when I talk about sales teams, yeah, it's a very easy to think about idea. It's not such a complicated thing. The other day, I saw this person exemplifying the concept of being a supervisor, and he had in his PowerPoint presentation these pictures of a lion with his pride. And it was so trite because here you have this high-powered executive who's using lions in his PowerPoint presentation, and it just tones everything to a level that I'm sure he wouldn't have liked to see it. The challenge that I have for everyone is use metaphors for highly complex concepts, because that's when the brain needs them. The brain learns and remembers based on associations. That's when metaphors and analogies work best, but use them for something that is very hard to understand, not for something that is trite and very easy to understand. Because then you're taking the level of the audience's intelligence down as well. I don't need lions and pride in order to understand the concept of somebody being a supervisor of somebody else.
Use a metaphoric image if you have to, but it shouldn't be your go-to. I mean, there are some concepts. If you want to talk about strategy, you know, what's the literal image for that, except if the literal image about strategy is you've hired a new strategic executive, well, then show a photo of that new executive. But I mean, you're right. You're absolutely right. But it should be. We should first try to think literal, and then if we can't get one, then we can explore metaphor.
In my experience, the reason why this happens is convenience. It's simple to reach out and get an image and throw it in there, and it's tangentially related to the topic we're speaking about. Some of the other websites that I go to be inspired and to find graphic assets or assets for my presentations are the Noun Project. I don't know if anyone's heard of that. Love the Noun Project. It's basically a sea of iconography or symbols that then we can use for complex metaphors like Carmen explained, like Nolan was talking about, Rick was talking about. The other file I use for data visualization for the folks that have to visualize quantitative data. Another one is for data visualization is informationisbeautiful.net. Once again, that's informationisbeautiful.net. For free imagery, although I found that I have to sift through a sea of visuals like, oh, here's my grandmother at the stove. But there is a place called morguefile.com and stalk morgue as in mortuary, not mortuary, morgue, UE file.com. You have it.
Okay.
And then stockvault.net is another. Those are great. And if a new one I stumbled across is called canva.com, canva.com. What a wonderful, wonderful tool. And there's just a whole host we could probably share, and I'm sure we can add it to information that goes out in Presentation Expert in the future.
The next question up is really both for, maybe let's start with Nolan and Mike, is tell us about the design challenges that your clients give you and how you make them work. What kind of solutions do you come up with? Can you give me an example of the worst design challenge and how you fixed it?
That's a pretty big question.
I know.
I'll jump in first, Mike. One of the things that I find a lot of people doing when they're working in slides is they're thinking textually, and they start with the text first. So they write, and sort of the stereotypical old way of making a slide is you write all your bullet points on the left-hand side, and then you think, oh, let me add some visual interest. Let me go to Google or whatever, steal an image of the kid with the lemonade stand or whatever, and let me throw that on the right side. But the way our brains think is brains are actually wired to think in images first. That's sort of the default rather than text. So I encourage people to swap that thinking. Try to communicate whatever you're trying to say with the image first. And that image can be a photo, it can be a chart, it can be an illustration, it can be iconography. Try to communicate your story first and foremost with that image. Make that central. Make it the whole slide, or if you can. And then only bring in as much text as you need to clarify it. So it's just that sort of swap thinking. I think the old model is text first, image second. The new model, the more effective model, is image first, and then only as much text as that absolutely necessary. So that's just sort of a structural way I encourage people to think and create their slides.
Mike, how about you?
One of the challenges that, like Nolan, that I have frequently is that there are two pieces. There are two pieces when we create a presentation, mainly that the speakers have to deal with. And one is the aesthetic, how does it look and feel? And then the other is the content or the message. And there's two different ways I handle both of those challenges. So for the aesthetic, I'll ask my client, do you have any preconceptions, things that you've seen that you like, that you don't like? And that is where what we've heard, I am often inspired by what I see from Rick and Nolan and Carmen. The things that they do make me come up with better aesthetics. They are all amazing presenters, and their presentations are stunning. So what I ask them to do is show me examples of things that you liked in the past, and then we'll start to narrow down the aesthetic part of the design challenge. As far as the content side of it, what I'll do is I'll actually start with text. It sounds counterintuitive as a designer, but what I'll do is I'll ask them things like, well, what's your message? And that's textual. What message do we want to send? And that's all driven by what we want the outcome to be. So what could we say to the audience to encourage them or nudge them to do what we'd like them to do? And we could talk about memory, we could talk about adoption, we could talk about sales. All of this is germane. So knowing our audience, knowing what we want them to do, and then figuring out what we could say, what do we leave them with that would encourage them or persuade them to do it, that becomes our takeaway, our message for our entire presentation. And then we use all of the techniques that Carmen has shared, that Nolan has talked about, that Rick joked about, to get people to do what we want them to do, and then answering the questions that the audience has that would arise after I state this thing, like, oh, you're going to save a whole bunch of money if you buy our widget. What would they ask? Well, how much money am I going to save? What is your widget? What makes it better? These are the questions that need to be answered in our presentation, and so we would do that textually at first. Then we would find a way to visually represent that information after we know what we want to say. It's kind of like, I don't want to have a flowery sentence until I know what I want to say. I don't want to use an image until I know what I want the image to do first. So we do that first. So the challenge becomes aesthetic is separate from the content. We tackle each, in my experience, independently, figuring out what we want to say, how we want to say it. I hope that makes sense.
I think this is terrific that each of you reached different conclusions here about what to do first. I think through images or text, because I have found that there's just no way to generalize how people will think most creatively. I get asked all the time in my workshops, should I create the text first or the imagery first, or more to the point, should I create the handout first with all of the verbiage, or should I first create the slide, the properly crafted slide with just a few key messages and perhaps an image? And I usually demur in answering that question, because there's just no way to generalize how people think creatively. The key is that they separate those two parts of the project. I don't care which one they work on first, the highly evocative slide or the full detail that belongs in the handout. The key is to separate those two things and think about them individually. Generally, the person's own creative workflow is going to determine which they do first and whether they think images first or whether they think text first.
I want to clarify something. I think a lot of people go wrong in slides because they try to do two things at the same time, which we've all sort of been talking about. They're trying to write their content and design at the same time. And that is just a recipe for disaster. And so when I talked about thinking in terms of image first, that's the design part. That's the design part. So before you get to what the slide looks like, it's fine to have undesigned slides and lots of bullet points and use it as your outline, as your sort of bonnet of information. But once it comes time to start designing that slide, that's when you move your text off onto the pasteboard. Now you start thinking what image is there and all that once your message is down. And also on that, I will say that I tell people a lot, content affects design and design affects content. So if you hand me 20 bullet points and say, make me a great looking billboard on the highway, it's physically not possible. And yet people will say, here are 20 bullet points on the slide. I need every one of them. Make it look like an Apple keynote. Those beautiful things with the image and one word. Yeah, but that's not the content you handed me. So we've got to work on that content first. So people have to be honest with themselves whether their content will allow for the type of design they very often want.
And I think there's a big challenge too. We have a question or kind of a comment as to a struggle from one of our audience members, David. He says his biggest challenge is displaying lots of technical information on a small number of slides. And I know, Nolan, you've done a webinar for us that really talked about that as well. So anyone want to talk about how you handle technical information?
I can tackle that, and I have a piece of good news that anybody will enjoy when they consider the struggle graphics versus text. From the brain's perspective, even text has the capability to be remembered if it leads to mental imagery. Because even though imagined pictures and real perception are not the same, they're functionally the same. In the sense of even if I use words to enable you to imagine something, that can still become memorable. So if I said to you, imagine what it would be like to row down the Amazon River, or imagine what you would look like with a third eye in the middle of your forehead, I don't have to have a PowerPoint slide for that. I can just simply use the words, and by creating that mental imagery, I can still form a memory trace for you. That's a piece of good news because not everybody has to have access to that expensive stock photography or be so bogged down into graphic design. If you take care of your words, then you can take care of memory. Unfortunately, what happens? We speak in so many abstracts that it's very difficult for the audience to form a mental picture. And technical presentations are very close to that environment where they're staying at such an abstract level that it's very difficult for people, because obviously they will not remember all those charts. It's very difficult to walk away with a strong mental picture of something. And the strongest negotiations out there, because after all, a presentation is a form of negotiation, are the ones where everybody has the same mental picture. Think about you and your spouses. The best vacations you've ever had are the ones where you both had the same mental pictures when you walked away. So as we go back to those technical presentations, we are humbled that people are not going to remember many of those details. Will they walk away, though, with an image and a feeling that you can control and is the same for everybody? That's where the challenge becomes. Asking how many bullet points should we put on a slide or how many charts could be fit on this space, that's a 1997 kind of question. A modern question to ask is, what do I want to put in people's brains that they can act on in a few days?
And I heard something in that question that I want to bring up because it is a trend that I'm hearing about a lot in business these days. How do I put all this information into a few slides? What I'm hearing a lot is my boss only allows 5 slides, or it's a corporate policy now that we have to present in 10 slides. And I always ask, I said, is that independent of how long the presentation is or what kind of content you're trying to present? So if you are getting that from your boss or your company, you really have to question why they're asking that. And my assumption is people are telling employees now, you can only use 5 slides, you can only use 10 slides or 6 slides or whatever, because they actually don't want all the thinking and all the minutia that people tend to throw into decks. They want what is the actionable item, which Mike talked about. What is the top line? Don't show me your thinking. Don't show me all your numbers, all your tables of numbers. What is the result? What should I do? So it's that macro thinking. It's that larger takeaway we keep talking about. So if you have 5 slides to present, maybe it's, here are the 3 things I want you to take away from. Slide 1's an introduction. Slide 1 is the first. Slide 2, 2, 3, and 4, those 3 things. And your last slide is your wrap-up. That's it.
So Nolan, are you saying that you think that organizations often use this sort of as a form of triage? These slides are a disaster, so only use a few of them that'll actually make people create better content that way?
No, well, they're throwing that out as some sort of solution because they don't have a solution for the problem of people throwing all this content. They're not addressing the real issue, which is, I don't want all that content. I want, what's the actionable item? What do I do? What's my takeaway? But is this sort of, and so the result is people take 30 minutes of material, and instead of putting it on 30 slides, they put it on 5 slides. That doesn't help the company.
There's 2 forms of irony in this, and the one is that it really could work. I mean, if you tell somebody you can only use 5 slides, it might really force them to stop creating the kind of dreck that they do. The other piece of irony is that if you get somebody who's slick with PowerPoint, they can create an entire encyclopedia in 5 slides.
True.
Don't they say that? Do they say that the best battle plans are the battle plans that you can fit on 1 page?
Rick, let me just say, we've had a couple of comments that your audio is low again, so just want to ask you, I know you're going to shoot the mic before the end of this day.
Because I speak so softly, right, everybody?
I know you do, just like me, so just want to make you aware of that.
Thanks.
It's very sexy.
I was, I know, exactly. I was just, well, there was something that I'll remember. I was just helping, I help Xerox put together a technical presentation, and like all the people who are like Carmen and Nolan and Rick, we often get to deal with relatively dry subject matter, and sometimes we actually need that technical information. So Nolan said it, what is the actionable item? What is the thing we want to take away from this slide? And the same approach that I think all of us take to creating a deck, we take toward a slide. So when I look at a slide with technical information, I think, well, what is the takeaway? If my goal is to motivate or persuade, I find that I am much more successful if I have a benefit to the audience. If there's no benefit, then quite frankly, I don't care about the thing you're talking about. So if we can put a benefit into it, for example, I'm talking about a technical solution. What's the benefit of this technical solution? Well, it saves money or time or whatever the thing is. If there is a benefit, then in the slide, I need to answer 2 questions. The 2 questions are, what is my solution and how will it give me the benefit? In the technical part, I only include information that is relevant or germane to the message we're sending. So I don't include everything. I only include the information that I need the audience to understand in order to arrive at that conclusion, the benefit to which they're going to get. That kind of pushes away all of the extraneous information that would typically fill a slide. And when it comes to the what is it, for example, I ask the subject matter expert, the really technical person, explain it to me so I understand. And I am not the sharpest banana in the cactus patch. And if I can understand it, then I know the audience well. If the audience are technical experts, then we can geek out a little bit more. But I'm going to assume we want to cater to the lowest common denominator. And that lowest common denominator can still be really, really smart. Nonetheless, I ask the person to walk me through it. And then once I understand it, it typically breaks down into a process diagram or an architectural diagram or something that's relatively simple. And then we include the additional technical or deeper data on perhaps another slide where we use that as our roadmap and then we break it down.
Or you include that more technical data in a handout. Like if you have a table of numbers or the more detailed explanation, that's the domain of a handout. It's not the domain of what you put up on a screen. And it's fine to have both of those things. They're both valid.
I like that, and here are 2 things that people will enjoy hearing, especially when you handle a lot of complex and technical information. Number 1 is this. As you have progress from slide to slide to slide, it is okay for some slides to not be fully explainable or fully memorable. All you're doing is you're not counting on verbatim memory, you're just counting on gist memory, in the sense of, if I presented to you 5 slides and each of them had technical, by the end of that, you kind of get the gist that there's a lot going on. And perhaps that is your intent anyway. I don't want to walk maybe into a meeting showing how simplified our things are. I want to show that there's a lot of complexity and somehow we have a solution for it. So don't shy away and sacrifice all of your complexity, because even neophytes in an audience will be more impressed by something that is complex versus something that has been reduced to only a few elements that perhaps I cannot trust. So embrace your complexity. But number 2 is make sure that you balance it. Remember, we're talking about trade-offs. Make sure you balance it against something that is at some point a little bit more simple. So it's not so much about complexity versus simplicity as it is the rhythm between the two, because in order for the brain to appreciate something that is simple, it has to know the opposite state. It has to know the complexity from which it has come. So nobody's going to appreciate your nice slides that are very Apple-like with one key word unless they realize that those have sprung from something that was very chaotic and very difficult to handle at some point. And you master that rhythm between something simple and complex. That's when you get the audience's attention and appreciation, not with one or the other.
That's wonderful. Nolan said that it's okay to put all that in a handout. I'd go a step further. I'd say that it's necessary that you do it. Your audience deserves your best effort. Your audience deserves for you to be thinking as clearly as you can about the best way to deliver information. And when you put all that technical detail into a handout, you've told your audience that you've thought about this and that you really think you understand the right way to deliver that information. Carmen, Mike, and Nolan will all remember back in 2010 at the conference in San Diego that year when that very sweet, unassuming man from South Korea stood up and said to us, "If I don't create busy slides, my boss will think I'm lazy." And I had such sympathy for his plight. Do you remember that, when that guy stood up in front of all 220 of us and said this, and it was like, all we could do was sort of put our arm around him and say, boy, we feel your pain. And, if we can start getting organizations to understand that a presentation is more than just what you say, but also what you give to your audience, then, maybe we're going to start to solve things here.
Well, I'm going to move the conversation on to the productivity question. And people are always looking to do more in less time. Can you share, maybe I'll start with you, Nolan, and then the rest of the group can chime in. Can you share perhaps some of your favorite shortcuts, PowerPoint shortcuts, and then any ways that you might actually be able to condense your rehearsal time if getting ready for a significant presentation?
One thing that just saves me time left and right is I have a resource file, a personal resource file of elements that I've used before. Not photos necessarily, but things like these icons we've been talking about and some other sort of PowerPoint things that you create in PowerPoint that allow me to work with imagery and sort of photo frames and maps and vector maps and things like that. And they're all categorized. For example, all my iconography is categorized. So what I'm doing is I'm not reinventing the wheel each time. I'm not rushing out to, where can I find that icon or what can I do? I'm reusing stuff, and it's literally cut and paste. So that's a file that I literally have open every single day of my work, my life. It's open, and I'm constantly cutting and pasting. So that allows me to just grab something I've done before and repurpose it. So that's just one sort of small thing. In terms of, how to make rehearsals quicker, somebody once told me that too much rehearsal is not enough. I'm of that school. There are some people that will say, no, you just want to keep it a little loose and never rehearse and just so it feels free and off the cuff. Well, some people can do that. I can't. I need to rehearse and rehearse and rehearse. And I mean, you don't have to spend weeks and weeks and weeks, but you do need to set aside genuine rehearsal time, and this means door closed, presentation up in front of you, and here's the most important thing, you have to speak out loud. None of this in my own head thing. It has to be a real rehearsal. Close the door, don't care if somebody can hear you through the wall. You have to really do it. Do that a couple times. at least, and then you can still improvise once you get to it, but you have to make the time for rehearsal. I just haven't found, many shortcuts that replace, or any, that replace genuine rehearsal.
Mm-hmm. Anybody else like to chime in on that? Mike or Rick?
I will. I want to talk about rehearsal a little bit because I've discovered that can take many forms, and some people, like Nolan, need to rehearse a lot before they perform. Other people get stiff and mechanical, and they do better with less rehearsal. And this, again, is just a product of personality. But what I have found is that there isn't a person on earth who can't benefit from more time rehearsing with the software when they are going to be showing slides as part of their presentation. Having the wireless remote in their hand, working through the slides as they speak, I don't know anybody who can't use as much rehearsal time as possible on that, even if that's a person who does better by being a little bit more spontaneous with his or her actual thoughts.
And I want to say that sometimes people who do think that, oh, I'll do better with improvisation, or I'll do better with just a few bullet points in my head, the bad consequence of that is the fact that you end up keeping the best parts of the presentation to yourself. How often have you not had the chance to rehearse, went in front of an audience, delivered something, and after the fact you thought, shoot, I should have covered this thing and that thing, and the other thing I should have actually said it the other way, not the way that I said it. So don't believe the mirage of, oh, I kind of know, I sort of know, but rather clearly know what you want to put in their minds, because if it's not clear to you, it will not be clear to them. And if it's not clear to them, then why should they fight for that cause that Mike was talking about?
And people, if you're not using it, and you present with PowerPoint all the time, you need to be using presenter view using your own laptop. And if you don't know what presenter view is, it kicks in when you have a second screen. It's what in your laptop you see is basically your own personal teleprompter with your speaker notes, the current slide, and the next slide. Your audience just sees the one slide. And that's a technical thing, but it's when somebody says, give me the most useful tool in PowerPoint to reduce the amount of bullet points and text on the screen, I say it's presenter view, because it allows you to take your notes. Remember, the presentation is not for you, it's for the audience. It allows you to take your keywords and your notes and all that stuff that prompts you and put it in your speaker notes that only you see. And that allows you to put very little on the screen and have your speaker notes right in front of you. I have a terrible memory. I use presenter view all the time. It's right there. My notes are right there, and I can be staring at the audience, but I'm actually staring at my laptop screen, and nobody's the wiser. Make use of it.
I like that.
One of the things I noticed is that it sounded like Rick and Nolan were in disagreement about practicing, and what I found is no. I think that, Rick, tell me if I'm wrong here, because way back in the day when I first started presenting to live audiences, I was super nervous. So I would have pages of bullets that I wanted to speak to for my slides, and I would refer to those. And I practiced and practiced and practiced to the point that I feel like I became a bit robotic, like I must hit these points, I must always say them in this way. And to Rick's point, somebody who I trust said, lose the notes, buddy. He said, your slides are your cues. You should be fine. Or presenter view is your cue. That's your notes. Use that. So I ditched them, and what I found was the practice isn't about practicing. It's more about knowing the material. Would you agree, Rick?
Yes, I would agree. This is all so wonderfully complicated. I think it's just phenomenal how we can all reach different conclusions and toss this about. This is the kind of stuff that we talk about in the bar at the conference over a beer or a glass of wine or something. Because rehearsal takes many different forms. So do notes. And it works great for Nolan to have presenter view next to him. I become an idiot with presenter view. What I find is that if my monitor is right next to me, I end up looking at it all the time. So I would much rather have just index cards that are near me, like at the podium, at the lectern that's maybe 5 feet away, and I'll go over and I'll look at them if I need to. But otherwise, I am more comfortable when I'm just speaking to the points. I assume the risk. Carmen mentioned earlier that I might forget something. That's the risk of speaking live, and I assume that risk all the time. I would rather risk that than sounding like a robot. Now, having said this, Carmen is one of the most accomplished people that I think I've ever seen at our conference. She can rehearse. I'm sure she rehearses, right? You rehearse, don't you? Like all the time, I'm sure. And she is so prepared, and she's able to do that to a degree that is unlike anybody else I've ever met. That's why she keeps coming back and giving keynotes at our conference, because she's so skilled that way. I would fall completely flat on my face if I tried to do that. I mean, imagine if I had a script and I memorized it, and that was the way I started the conference each year. Everybody would walk out.
But after some rehearsal, though, you internalize those things so much, where I would guarantee that if Rick practiced and practiced and practiced some more, and there were some phrases that he wanted to hit just so, if you are dedicated enough to that content and if you have enough chemistry, it's impossible to sound like a robot. And sometimes what I remind people is this: look at your core message, something that you absolutely believe in, and ask, would you take that message out on a date? And if the answer is yes, and if you'd even consider taking it on a second date, that's even better, because quite often we sound robotic because we don't have the chemistry with the content. We sound robotic because perhaps somebody else has written the script for us, which is the case in many corporate presentations. You don't have the luxury to create your own things. You're being given things to say. Then what happens? And the solution for that is to find something that definitely excites you and something that ignites that chemistry, and that will carry you through.
Well, the last thing is, I think Rick, Nolan, and Carmen, I think we're all dancing around. It's all critical to be ourselves, not be someone we're not. So we all have different ways of practicing, and ultimately, sometimes I'm brought in to do orals coaching for very technical data. And the one thing I ask them when they present, do you feel comfortable saying what you just said? And if they say no, then I say it in your own words. They're the experts. They know the content because they wrote it. So really, it's just a matter of how do they say it that they feel very comfortable in a way that they feel comfortable saying it, because human beings have an amazing BS detector. We can tell when someone's being fake, and we don't trust people who are fake. So we want to find out if this person's being genuine, because this is the person who I'm going to buy from. Without trust, I don't buy into or buy from anybody.
Humans have an amazing BS detector. That's got to be the quote of the hour, Sharyn, I think.
I was just thinking that belongs on social media. I love it. Terrific. Well, I know we're running short on time, so I have kind of one question about looking forward. We're hearing a lot about mobile presenting. We're hearing a lot about video. Does that change the way we are going to address presentations, create presentations, deliver presentations?
Let's hope not the last part, because as Mike said, the audience can tell if you're not genuine, and it doesn't matter what your medium is. So the delivery part, that shouldn't change. That shouldn't change for the next 1,000 years. You know, the geeky component of that's different. You know, we all need to try to stay on the top of that wave and not drown. But delivering, nope, that's just all the human element.
Only reason to develop presentation content anyway is to get people to act or to follow a cause of sorts. One of the biggest ways to change behavior in some way is to hook into people's existing habits. It's a lot easier to hook into those than to convince people to adopt something new. And if their habits have changed, then we have to change along with those. So the best presentation is that which is seen. And if people are watching them on mobile devices now, well, it serves us well to be there. If they're watching them in video format, it serves us well to be on there. Be where the people are, and you have more chances for impactful presentations.
I want to acknowledge, because there are a lot of people right now probably listening saying, well, this is all great, but I don't present live. And this is a trend that I'm seeing more and more and more and more. When I talk to a group of people, I say, who presents live? And the number of hands, the number of hands that go up keep getting fewer and fewer. So while yes, there's still a place for this traditional presenting that we've been talking about, more and more presentations are simply being emailed. They're simply being printed. They're simply being viewed by one person on a tablet, or there's just a phone call and it gets sent in advance. So don't think that just because you're using PowerPoint that things need to be these large screen, large format, one picture, couple word type presentations. There is a wonderful book out there called Slide Docs. Just go to Google Slide Docs. It's put out by Duarte.com, which is a presentation firm out there, which basically, it's the whole book about how to use PowerPoint to create presentations that are never ever put up on screen and presented formally. So for all the people out there saying, oh, I only, it turns into a PDF and I email it off, there are formats, there are ways of creating printed presentations that might be a little different than what we've been talking about today, but that's something I'm seeing more and more.
Rick, I think you should have the final word as far as this topic, and then Dave and I will close it.
Maybe this is a question of semantics. I wonder if that is a presentation. If you create some slides in PowerPoint and then you PDF it and email it, have you created a presentation or have you created a document? I understand the idea of a presentation that maybe isn't live and in person. Today there are podcasts, webinars like this one. I get all that. But when you end up sending something that is printed and designed to be read, personally, I don't call that a presentation any longer. I call that a document.
That's valid. It is semantics. I call it a printed presentation very often as opposed to an on-screen presentation. But the point is you have much more leeway to include more content because people can read. But it means a lot of things. It means 11-point type, not 24-point type. It means, reliance on prose and tables of numbers. You can use that in a printed presentation where you can't on screen. So again, it's a valid form of presenting information, and I would just encourage people to think about it that way. Just because you're using PowerPoint doesn't mean it has to be 40-point header, 20-point subhead, bullet points.
Any final words, and then I'll close it out?
Just want to thank everybody for participating, and I think this went quite well, and hopefully we can all do it again. It'd be great.
We've really enjoyed this. I want to tell you we love it. I mean, one of the things we're going to do is man-on-the-street interviews at the Presentation Summit. Hopefully we'll get a chance to see all of you there, and we just want to say thank you. This is the first time we've done something like this, and I think we're going to do it again. So stay connected with us. We're on social media. We're actually going to be posting the webinar recording either today or tomorrow, and you'll send it by email. And want to thank everyone and hope you have a great rest of your day.